Sarah Martinez wiped flour from her hands onto her favorite apron, the one her daughter Emma had painted with tiny handprints when she was 7 years old. The faded blue fabric still bore traces of rainbow colors where Emma had enthusiastically declared it the most beautiful apron in the whole world. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and vanilla as she pulled the last batch of chocolate chip cookies from the oven, comfort food for their upcoming road trip to Yellowstone National Park. After 15 years of marriage, she knew exactly what would make David smile during their carefully planned 2-week family vacation. These cookies had been his favorite since college, when she'd first made them in her tiny dorm kitchen to cheer him up during finals week. "Mom, can I have one now?" 12-year-old Emma bounced into the kitchen, her dark curls escaping from her ponytail, while 10-year-old Jake followed close behind, already reaching toward the cooling rack. "Let them cool first, sweetheart," Sarah laughed, gently swatting Jake's hand away. "Besides, we need to save some for the drive tomorrow." The suburban Denver home in the quiet Littleton neighborhood buzzed with pre-vacation excitement that had been building for weeks. Suitcases lay open in bedrooms upstairs, camping gear was stacked by the garage door in organized piles, and travel games were scattered across the coffee table in the family room. Sarah had spent the past month meticulously planning every detail of their trip, making reservations at family-friendly restaurants along their route, researching hiking trails suitable for children with varying fitness levels, mapping out educational stops at visitor centers, and even organizing backup indoor activities in case of unexpected weather changes. She'd created detailed itineraries, printed maps with rest stops marked, and packed emergency supplies for every conceivable situation they might encounter during their adventure. "Where's Dad?" Emma asked, stealing a cookie despite her mother's warning about the temperature. "Upstairs in his office, finishing up some work stuff," Sarah replied, though she'd noticed David had been increasingly distant these past few weeks. He claimed it was just stress from a big project at the engineering firm, but something felt different. Their conversations had become mechanical, focused on logistics rather than connection. As evening settled over their quiet neighborhood in Littleton, with the familiar sounds of children playing in nearby yards and the distant hum of traffic on Wadsworth Boulevard, Sarah decided to print the final vacation itinerary and double-check their hotel confirmations one last time. David's laptop sat open on the granite kitchen counter where he'd left it after checking weather forecasts for Yellowstone and reviewing their driving route through Wyoming. She'd borrowed his computer countless times before. They shared everything, in their marriage, or so she had always believed. Their relationship had been built on trust and transparency, with shared passwords, joint bank accounts, and open communication about every aspect of their lives together. The screen displayed his usual desktop wallpaper, a family photo from last Christmas, all 4 of them laughing around the tree. Sarah double-clicked on the browser icon and navigated to her email to access the travel documents she'd organized. But as she moved to close an existing tab, she noticed something odd. A folder on his desktop caught her attention. "Vacation" was the label, which seemed redundant since she'd already compiled all their travel information in a shared Google Drive folder. Curious, she clicked on it, expecting to find David's own version of their itinerary, or perhaps photos from previous trips he wanted to share with the kids. The folder opened, revealing a collection of documents that made her blood run cold. Petition for dissolution of marriage sat at the top of the list. Below it, financial statements she'd never seen, asset valuations of their home, investment accounts, and David's retirement fund. A document titled Custody Arrangement Proposal made her hands tremble as she scrolled down to see more files. Property division worksheet, child support calculator, and attorney contact information. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank into the nearest kitchen chair, the laptop screen blurring through sudden tears. Each document was meticulously organized, dated within the past month. David hadn't just been contemplating divorce. He'd been planning it with the precision of a military operation, while she'd been researching family-friendly hiking trails and booking dinner reservations. She clicked on the custody document with shaking fingers. Her heart shattered as she read his proposal. primary custody to him, with her getting every other weekend and one evening per week. The reasoning cited her emotional instability and inconsistent work schedule as a freelance graphic designer. None of it was true, but it was written with such legal authority that it terrified her. The financial documents were equally devastating and comprehensive. David had calculated their assets down to the penny with accountant-level precision, but the proposed division heavily favored him in ways that seemed deliberately manipulative. Their joint savings account, money she'd contributed to equally from her successful graphic design business over the years, was listed as his separate property because the account was technically in his name. The house they'd bought together, in 2010, using her inheritance from her grandmother as the down payment, was valued at current market rates, but the equity division seemed deliberately skewed in his favor. Their retirement accounts, investment portfolios, even her business equipment and client contracts were itemized and assigned values that would leave her with barely enough to support herself, let alone fight for custody of their children. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Lisa. "Can't wait to see pics from Yellowstone. You guys deserve this vacation after David's crazy work schedule lately." The irony was suffocating. While she'd been planning their dream family trip, researching wildlife photography spots for David's hobby, and buying new hiking boots for them kids, he'd been consulting divorce attorneys and calculating how to dismantle their life together. Every tender moment between them over the past month had been a lie. She heard David's footsteps on the stairs and quickly closed the folder, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. By the time he entered the kitchen, she was standing at the sink, pretending to wash dishes with mechanical precision while her entire world collapsed around her. "Smells good in here," David said, his voice carrying the same casual tone he'd used for weeks while secretly plotting their divorce. He grabbed a cookie and bit into it, humming with approval. "The kids are going to love these on the road. You always think of everything." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched him in the reflection of the kitchen window. This man she'd loved since college, who'd held her hand during her father's funeral 3 years ago, who'd coached Jake's Little League team and never missed Emma's school plays. The stranger standing behind her looked exactly like her husband, but felt like a complete unknown. "I finished booking those restaurant reservations you wanted," she managed to say, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. "Great, I'm really looking forward to this trip," David replied. And the lie came so easily that Sarah wondered how many others he'd told her recently. "It'll be good for all of us to get away. Quality family time, you know?" The phrase quality family time hit her like a physical blow. He was already thinking about custody schedules, about proving himself as the better parent during their final family vacation together. After David went to bed, Sarah crept back to the kitchen and reopened the laptop with trembling hands. She spent hours reading through every document in that folder, taking screenshots with her phone and forwarding them to her personal email account. The attorney's contact information showed multiple consultation appointments over the past 3 weeks. Bank statements revealed that David had been moving money into accounts she didn't know existed, accounts that weren't mentioned in their regular financial discussions. But the most devastating discovery came in a document titled Timeline and Strategy, which read like a military operation manual for dismantling their family. David had planned to file for divorce immediately after their return from Yellowstone, calculating that the family vacation would provide him with evidence of being a devoted father, while simultaneously giving him 2 weeks to further organize his financial strategy and document any unstable behavior from Sarah. The document outlined specific scenarios he planned to create during their trip. Situations where he would appear as the calm, responsible parent, while potentially triggering emotional responses from her that he could later cite as evidence of her unfitness as a mother. He'd even planned which restaurants to visit and which activities to suggest, all designed to create photographic evidence that would support his custody claims, while potentially undermining hers. The document outlined specific scenarios he planned to create. Situations where he would be the calm, responsible parent, while potentially triggering emotional responses from her, that he could later cite as evidence of her unfitness as a mother. Every photo they'd take, every moment of family, bonding on this trip, would be weaponized against her in court. Sarah realized she'd been cast as an unwitting accomplice in her own destruction. The vacation she'd planned as a celebration of their family would become the final act of their marriage's elaborate death scene. David had turned their love into a legal strategy. She found additional documents detailing their financial situation going back 5 years, revealing a pattern of deception that was breathtaking in its scope and calculation. David had been secretly consulting with financial advisors about protecting his assets in case of divorce, moving money into accounts that would be harder for her to discover or claim. He'd restructured his retirement funds, purchased insurance, policies she knew nothing about, and even established business relationships that would allow him to hide income during divorce proceedings. The level of premeditation was staggering. This wasn't a recent decision born of marital unhappiness, but a long-term strategy that suggested he'd been planning his exit for years while maintaining the facade of a committed husband and father. The level of deception was breathtaking. While she'd been building what she thought was their shared future, David had been constructing an exit strategy that would leave her with almost nothing. As dawn broke over the majestic Rocky Mountains visible from their kitchen window, casting long purple and gold shadows across the suburban landscape of their Colorado neighborhood, Sarah made a decision that would change everything about her future and her children's lives. She wouldn't confront David about the folder. Not yet. Instead, she would use the next 2 weeks exactly as he intended to use them, as an opportunity to gather evidence, build her own comprehensive strategy, and document her competence as a parent and partner. If David Martinez wanted to play elaborate games with their family's future, he was about to discover that his wife was a much better strategist than he'd ever imagined, and that the woman who'd successfully built a thriving graphic design business, while raising 2 children, possessed reserves of strength and cunning that he'd consistently underestimated throughout their marriage. If David Martinez wanted to play games with their family's future, he was about to discover that his wife was a much better strategist than he'd ever imagined. The woman who'd successfully built a freelance graphic design business while raising 2 children and managing a household was more than capable of outmaneuvering him. Sarah spent the remaining hours before dawn researching divorce law in Colorado, understanding her rights, and beginning to formulate a plan that would protect her children and secure their future. She made lists of every asset she could remember, every financial account, every piece of property they owned together. By the time David came downstairs for his morning coffee, Sarah was already dressed and packing the car with the methodical efficiency that had always impressed him. She greeted him with a smile that felt like wearing a mask, but she'd had years of practice hiding her true feelings behind the facade of the perfect wife and mother. "Ready for our adventure?" she asked, handing him his travel mug filled with coffee exactly the way he liked it. "More than ready," David replied, kissing her cheek with what seemed like genuine affection. This is going to be the trip of a lifetime. He had no idea how right he was, or that Sarah Martinez was about to become the most formidable opponent he'd ever faced. The morning sun cast long shadows across their driveway as the Martinez family loaded their silver Honda Pilot for what everyone, except Sarah, believed would be their dream vacation. She moved through the familiar choreography of family travel, checking that Emma had packed her inhaler for high-altitude activities, ensuring Jake hadn't forgotten his favorite stuffed animal, organizing snacks in the cooler according to dietary preferences and travel times, while her mind raced with the knowledge that this might be their last trip together as an intact family. "Did you remember the camera charger?" David asked, sliding the last suitcase into the cargo area. His tone was cheerful, almost excited, and Sarah had to grip the car door handle to steady herself against the wave of nausea that followed. She now understood that his excitement wasn't about family bonding. It was about executing his carefully planned strategy. "It's in the front pocket of my backpack," she replied, proud that her voice remained level and supportive. "Along with extra batteries, memory cards, and backup charging cables for everyone's devices." David smiled and squeezed her shoulder, a gesture that would have made her happy just 48 hours ago. Now it felt like a violation, knowing he was already planning to take those vacation photos and use them as evidence of his devotion to the children in court. Every affectionate touch was calculated, every family moment staged for future legal proceedings. Emma bounced in the back seat, clutching a new travel journal she'd bought specifically for the trip with her allowance. Money. "I'm going to write about everything we see," she announced with the enthusiasm that made Sarah's heart ache. "And draw pictures of all the animals we encounter in Yellowstone." Jake was already absorbed in his handheld gaming device, though he'd promised to put it away once they reached the more scenic parts of their drive. At 10, he was at that perfect age where he could appreciate nature, but still needed technological entertainment during long car rides through the plains of Colorado and Wyoming. As they pulled out of their neighborhood, Sarah caught sight of their house in the side mirror. The white colonial with black shutters looked peaceful in the morning light, its carefully maintained flower beds and freshly painted front door giving no hint of the turmoil contained within its walls. The house where she'd nursed both children, through countless illnesses, hosted birthday parties and holiday celebrations, built what she thought was a secure and loving home. She wondered if she'd ever see it as truly home again, or if it would become just another asset to be divided in legal proceedings. The first few hours of driving passed in relative normalcy, though Sarah found herself analyzing every interaction through the lens of her new knowledge. David handled the highway portions while Sarah navigated and managed the kids' requests for bathroom breaks and snacks. They played word games that Emma inevitably won, listened to her carefully curated road trip playlist that included everyone's favorite songs, and stopped at a roadside diner in Kansas that specialized in pie and claimed to have the world's best apple fritter. The diner was exactly the kind of authentic American experience Sarah had hoped to share with her children during their cross-country adventure. A family-owned establishment with red-checkered tablecloths, friendly waitresses who called everyone honey or sweetie, and portions large enough to share between family members. The walls were decorated with vintage Coca-Cola advertisements and black-and-white photographs of local farming families from decades past. Emma sketched the retro atmosphere in her travel journal while Jake collected sugar packets with different restaurant logos, adding them to a growing collection he'd started during previous family trips. David took numerous pictures of all of them, making sure he was prominently featured in each shot with his arms around the children, establishing himself as the central parental figure in what Sarah now recognized as carefully orchestrated photo opportunities designed for future legal proceedings. But Sarah found herself studying David with new eyes, cataloging behaviors she'd previously attributed to work stress or pre-vacation jitters. The way he checked his phone whenever he thought she wasn't looking, probably communicating with his attorney or reviewing his strategy documents. How he'd positioned himself strategically in every family photo they'd taken so far, always with his arms around the children, establishing himself as the central parental figure. The careful way he spoke to her in front of Emma and Jake, as if he were already practicing for depositions where every word would be scrutinized. "Remember when we drove to the Grand Canyon for our honeymoon?" David said as they crossed into Colorado, the landscape beginning to shift toward the dramatic scenery they'd come to see. "You insisted on taking pictures at every single scenic overlook because you wanted to remember every moment." Sarah remembered. She'd been 25 and convinced that documenting every moment would help them preserve their happiness forever. She'd believed in the permanence of love, in the reliability of the promises they'd made to each other. Now she realized David might be creating new memories specifically designed to replace and erase their old ones, building a narrative where he was the devoted family man, and she was somehow lacking. "That seems like a lifetime ago," she replied, which was true in ways he couldn't possibly understand. The woman who'd trusted completely, who'd shared every thought and dream with her husband, had died the moment she opened that folder on his laptop. That evening, they stopped at a family resort in Grand Junction, Colorado, a place Sarah had chosen specifically because it offered activities for all ages and had multiple amenities that would keep the children engaged and happy after long hours. In the car, the resort featured a heated swimming pool, game rooms with both video games and traditional activities like air hockey and ping pong, organized evening activities for families, and hiking trails that connected to the surrounding Red Rock country. Their adjoining rooms were clean and comfortable, decorated in a rustic Western style that celebrated Colorado's frontier heritage, with a connecting door that would let them maintain proper supervision while giving the kids some independence and space to decompress from travel. The resort catered to families with children, offering everything from video game rooms to organized evening activities. As Emma and Jake splashed in the heated pool under David's watchful eye, their laughter echoing off the water while he took more carefully composed photos, Sarah retreated to her room and called her sister Lisa from the bathroom with the shower running to mask her voice. "I need your help," she said, without preamble when Lisa answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah? What's wrong? You sound terrible. Are you sick?" "I can't explain everything right now because I'm sharing a room with David, but I need you to recommend a divorce attorney. A good one. Someone who won't be intimidated by David or his firm's legal connections." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Sarah thought the call had dropped. She could hear Lisa's television in the background, some evening news program discussing local politics. "Lisa, are you there?" "I'm here. What happened? You guys seemed so happy when I saw you at Mom's birthday last month." "David was talking about maybe taking a European vacation next year. I thought we were happy too." Sarah's voice cracked despite her efforts to stay composed. "I found out yesterday that David has been planning to divorce me for weeks, maybe months. He's already consulted attorneys, moved money around, and created a custody plan. This whole vacation is just part of his legal strategy." "Oh, honey." Lisa's voice filled with the protective anger that had gotten her into trouble on playgrounds when they were children. The same fierce loyalty that had seen Sarah through their father's death and their mother's subsequent depression. "What do you need me to do? How can I help?" "I need the name of someone who can help me protect the kids and our assets. Someone who can work quickly and quietly while I'm still gathering evidence. And I need you to hold on to some documents I'm going to email you tonight, just in case something happens to my copies, or if David discovers what I know." Lisa's husband Marcus was a family law attorney in Denver, and while he couldn't represent Sarah due to potential conflicts of interest within the legal community, he could recommend colleagues who specialized in high-conflict divorces involving significant assets and child custody disputes. More importantly, he could advise her on what evidence to gather and how to protect herself legally during this vulnerable period. "Are you safe?" Lisa asked, her voice tight with concern. "I mean, David's not. He wouldn't hurt you physically, would he?" Sarah considered the question seriously for the first time. The David she'd married would never harm her physically, but she was beginning to understand that she might not know her husband as well as she'd believed. A man capable of planning such an elaborate deception while maintaining a facade of loving devotion was capable of almost anything. "I don't think so. But Lisa, he's been lying to me for weeks while planning to take my children away and leave me with almost nothing. I'm not sure what he's capable of anymore. The level of calculation and deception is beyond anything I thought possible from someone who claims to love me." After hanging up, Sarah rejoined her family at the pool. David was teaching Jake how to do a proper backstroke while Emma practiced her diving technique in the shallow end, her form improving with each attempt. To any observer, they looked like the perfect American family on vacation. Exactly the image David was hoping to create for future legal proceedings. "Mom, watch this," Emma called out, executing a graceful dive that would have made her swimming instructor proud. The girl had been taking lessons for 3 years, and Sarah had never missed a single session, driving her to the pool twice a week and cheering from the observation deck. "Beautiful, sweetheart," Sarah applauded, forcing genuine enthusiasm into her voice while mentally cataloging this as another example of her active involvement in her children's lives. "Your form is getting so much better. All that practice is really paying off." Whatever was happening between her and David, she wouldn't let it destroy these moments for her children. They deserved to enjoy their vacation, even if it was built on lies and manipulation. She would protect their innocence for as long as possible. That night, after the kids were asleep in their adjoining room, Sarah sat on the small balcony outside her room and forwarded all the screenshots from David's laptop to Lisa, along with detailed notes about their family's financial situation and her observations about David's behavior. She also began documenting everything she could remember about their finances, David's behavior over the past few months, and her own involvement in the children's daily lives. The process of writing everything down was both therapeutic and terrifying. She realized how much evidence of manipulation existed that she'd previously dismissed as stress or distraction. David's increasing criticism of her parenting decisions, his subtle undermining of her authority with the children, his insistence on handling all major financial decisions while claiming to protect her from stress. David joined her on the balcony with 2 cups of coffee, settling into the chair beside her with a contented sigh that seemed genuine. "This is nice," he said, gesturing toward the mountain views visible in the distance. "We should do more of this. Maybe plan regular weekend getaways. Just the 2 of us." The casual cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. He was sitting. They're planning their divorce while talking about future romantic getaways they would never take. The man who'd been secretly meeting with attorneys was discussing relationship goals as if their marriage had a future. Sarah gripped her coffee mug tighter and managed to nod convincingly. "The kids seem to be having a wonderful time." "They are. This is exactly what they needed. What we all needed." David reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns across her palm in a gesture that had once comforted her, but now felt like another performance. "I love watching them discover new things together." Sarah let him hold her hand while mentally calculating how many more times she'd have to endure his deceptive touch before this charade ended. 2 weeks suddenly seemed like an eternity, but she reminded herself that every day bought her more time to build her defense and protect her children's future. When they finally went to bed, David kissed her goodnight with what seemed like genuine affection, his arms wrapping around her in the familiar embrace that had once made her feel safe and cherished. Sarah lay awake long after his breathing became regular, staring at the ceiling and wondering how many other nights he'd kissed her, while secretly counting down to their divorce filing. Tomorrow they would reach Yellowstone, and the real performance would begin. But Sarah Martinez was no longer just a victim of her husband's deception. She was becoming a strategic opponent who would fight for everything that mattered to her. Yellowstone National Park spread before them like a living postcard. As their Honda Pilot crested the hill leading to the Roosevelt Arch entrance, the massive stone gateway that had welcomed visitors to America's first national park since 1903. The iconic archway, built with locally quarried stone and designed to blend with the natural landscape, stood as a testament to American conservation efforts and the democratic ideal that natural wonders should be preserved for all citizens, regardless of economic status. Emma pressed her face against the window, her journal already half filled with detailed observations from their journey across 3 states, while Jake had finally put away his gaming device completely, captivated by the promise of seeing real bears and wolves in their natural habitat, something he'd been eagerly anticipating since they'd started planning the trip months earlier. "Welcome to Yellowstone National Park," David read from the historic archway as they passed beneath it, his voice filled with the kind of enthusiasm that would have thrilled Sarah just days ago, for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. This place, dedicated to preservation and protection of America's natural heritage, would serve as the backdrop for the dissolution of everything she'd worked to preserve and protect in her own life. But it would also become the stage where she would prove herself as the capable, devoted parent David was planning to portray her as unfit to be. They checked into the Old Faithful Inn, a rustic lodge built in 1904 that Sarah had specifically chosen because it offered family-friendly accommodations within walking distance of the park's most famous attraction. The massive log structure, with its soaring lobby and stone fireplace, represented the kind of authentic American experience she wanted her children to remember. Their suite had 2 bedrooms connected by a common area with period furniture, perfect for evening card games and morning coffee before heading out on daily adventures. "Can we see Old Faithful right now?" Emma asked, bouncing on her toes as soon as they'd dropped their luggage in the rustic but comfortable rooms. Her excitement was infectious, and Sarah felt a pang of guilt that her daughter's joy was being overshadowed by adult deception. "Let's get settled first," David replied, but his smile was indulgent as he ruffled Emma's hair for another photo opportunity. "Then we'll check the eruption schedule and plan our afternoon around it." Sarah watched him interact with the children, noting how he made sure to be the one answering their questions, the one making decisions about their activities. Every interaction seemed calculated to demonstrate his role as the primary parent, the one the kids naturally turned to for guidance and approval. But two could play that game, and Sarah had been playing it longer. "Actually," Sarah interjected smoothly, pulling out a detailed folder she'd prepared, "I already checked the schedule this morning and called the visitor center. The next eruption is predicted for 2:30, which gives us time to grab lunch at the Ybor Inn's restaurant and find good seats. I also picked up Junior Ranger booklets for both of you at the visitor center in Colorado yesterday." She handed Emma and Jake each a booklet filled with educational activities designed to help children learn about the park's geology, wildlife, and conservation efforts. Emma's eyes lit up with the kind of genuine excitement that reminded Sarah why she loved being a mother. "If we complete these, we get official badges. And we can attend the evening ranger talk about wolf reintroduction," Sarah added, pulling out a printed schedule of all the park's educational programs that she'd researched and organized by age appropriateness. "I thought you'd both enjoy learning about the ecosystem restoration project, especially since we might see some of the wolf packs during our hiking tomorrow." David's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been annoyance or surprise. Sarah had just demonstrated her thorough planning and engagement with their children's educational interests, undermining any narrative about her being an uninvolved or unorganized parent. She was proving that she was the one who thought ahead, who researched and planned for their children's growth and development. Over the next few days, Sarah made sure to document everything with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to her graphic design projects. She took photos of herself helping Jake identify different types of volcanic rock during their hike to Artist Point, videos of Emma reading aloud from her journal entries about the Grand Prismatic Spring, and screenshots of her research into child-friendly hiking trails that accommodated Emma's mild asthma and Jake's shorter attention span. But she also began noticing things about David that she'd previously overlooked or excused. During their visit to the Mammoth Hot Springs, he spent more time on his phone, probably communicating with his attorney, than watching the terraced limestone formations that had taken thousands of years to create. When Jake expressed genuine interest in the park's wildlife management program and asked thoughtful questions about conservation, David redirected the conversation toward more practical topics like engineering and mathematics, missing the opportunity to nurture his son's natural curiosity. Most tellingly, David seemed uncomfortable whenever Sarah demonstrated competence or took initiative. When she successfully identified a black bear through binoculars during their wildlife viewing expedition, drawing on research she'd done about distinguishing bears from large dogs at distance, he quickly pointed out that it was probably just a large cinnamon-colored dog, undermining her expertise in front of the children. When she helped another family whose car had broken down by flagging down a park ranger and offering them water and snacks while they waited for assistance, he muttered about getting too involved in other people's problems and potentially making them late for their own planned activities. Sarah began to see a pattern that had been invisible during 15 years of marriage. David's love and respect for her seemed contingent on her remaining in a supporting role, never outshining him or challenging his position as the family's primary decision-maker. Any demonstration of her competence or independence was met with subtle criticism or attempts to redirect attention back to him. The divorce papers suddenly made more sense. He wasn't just planning to leave her. He was planning to diminish her completely, to rewrite their history so that he appeared to be the superior parent who'd been carrying an incompetent spouse. On their 4th day in the park, they embarked on a challenging hike to Fairy Falls, a 7-mile round trip that would test everyone's endurance and require careful planning. Sarah had chosen the trail specifically because it required the kind of parental supervision and preparation that demonstrated real engagement with the children's safety and educational development. She'd studied trail maps, weather patterns, and safety recommendations for weeks before their trip. "Are you sure this isn't too ambitious for the kids?" David asked as they set out early in the morning, their backpacks loaded with water, snacks, first aid supplies, Emma's inhaler, and educational materials about the trail's geological features. "I researched the trail extensively," Sarah replied, showing him the printed map with rest stops marked and estimated hiking times, calculated based on the children's ages and fitness levels. "It's rated as moderate difficulty, and both kids have been building up their endurance with our neighborhood walks all summer. Plus, the waterfall at the end is supposed to be spectacular, and there are several educational opportunities along the way." Emma was already several yards ahead, her junior ranger booklet in hand as she identified different types of pine trees and recorded her observations. Jake lagged behind slightly, but his excitement about potentially seeing wildlife kept him motivated and engaged with the natural world around him. 2 hours into the hike, they encountered a section where the trail became steep and rocky, and the higher altitude began affecting Emma's breathing. Sarah immediately called for a rest stop, pulling out the girl's inhaler and a bottle of water with the quick efficiency of someone who'd handled dozens of similar situations. "Take slow, deep breaths, sweetheart," Sarah instructed, timing Emma's, breathing and checking her oxygen levels with a small pulse oximeter she'd packed specifically for high-altitude activities. "We'll rest here until you're completely comfortable. There's no rush." David watched this interaction with what seemed like genuine surprise, as if he'd never seen her handle one of Emma's asthma episodes alone. Sarah realized he'd always been there to take charge, to be the parent who handled medical situations, but she'd been the one researching treatments, communicating with doctors, and managing Emma's daily medication routine. "I didn't know you carried that monitoring device," he said, gesturing toward the pulse oximeter. "I always carry it when we're doing physical activities at altitude," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "Emma's pediatrician recommended it after her episode at soccer camp last summer. I've been tracking her responses to different elevations and activity levels to help manage her condition better." Another piece of evidence that she was an attentive, well-prepared parent who thought ahead about her children's health and safety needs, the opposite of the picture David was apparently planning to paint in court. She made mental notes about his surprise, realizing that he'd been so focused on his own role as the competent parent that he'd never fully appreciated the depth of her involvement in their children's daily care. When they reached Fairy Falls, after 3 hours of hiking, the children's excitement was infectious and genuine. Emma immediately began sketching the 197-foot waterfall in her journal, while Jake searched for the perfect rocks to add to his growing geology collection. Sarah helped them both document their discoveries, answering their questions about water flow rates and geological formation, while David took photos that seemed more focused on capturing himself with the children than on their actual learning experiences. "Mom, look what I found," Jake called out, holding up a piece of volcanic glass that caught the afternoon sunlight like a natural prism. Sarah examined his find with genuine interest and knowledge, helping him identify it as obsidian and explaining how it formed during volcanic eruptions thousands of years ago. Emma abandoned her sketching to listen, and soon both children were, asking sophisticated questions about geology, Native American history, and the park's complex ecosystem. David joined the conversation, but Sarah noticed he seemed more interested in correcting the children's grammar or redirecting their curiosity toward more important subjects like mathematics and practical sciences than in nurturing their natural wonder about the world around them. He missed opportunities to connect with their interests, instead trying to mold their curiosity into shapes that matched his own preferences. That evening, as they sat around the massive stone fireplace in their suite, Sarah helped both children complete sections of their junior ranger booklets while David worked on his laptop in the corner. She told herself he was probably just checking work emails, but she couldn't shake the suspicion that he might be communicating with his attorney, updating his divorce timeline, or reviewing his strategy for the coming legal battle. "Mom, can you help me write about today's hike?" Emma asked, curling up beside Sarah on the rustic couch with her journal open to a page filled with sketches and half-finished observations. Of course, sweetheart. What was your favorite part of today? When you taught us about the obsidian and how volcanoes work, and when you helped me with my breathing on the steep part. You always know exactly what to do when I can't breathe right. Dad gets scared, but you stay calm and help me feel better. Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. Emma's words were a gift she hadn't expected. Validation that her parenting mattered. That her children noticed and appreciated her calm competence in crisis situations, her ability to manage their health needs and educational interests with equal skill. From across the room, David looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable. Sarah wondered if he was calculating how Emma's words might sound in a custody hearing, or if some part of him was finally recognizing the depth of care and competence he was planning to destroy through his legal maneuvering. Later that night, after the children were asleep in their adjoining room, Sarah sat on their suite's small balcony overlooking the park's vast wilderness and wrote detailed notes about the day's events in a private journal she'd started keeping. She documented Emma's asthma episode and her own calm, competent response, Jake's educational interests and how she'd nurtured and expanded them, and David's increasing detachment from their family's actual experiences and learning opportunities. She also wrote about something else she'd been noticing, her own strength and competence. For days now, she'd been operating under tremendous emotional stress while maintaining a perfect facade for her children and managing complex logistics in an unfamiliar environment. She'd been an attentive parent, a competent travel coordinator, a knowledgeable guide to educational opportunities, and a supportive partner to a man who was secretly plotting against her and their family. She was much stronger and more capable than David's divorce papers gave her credit for. And she was beginning to suspect that her strength and competence might be exactly what he was most afraid of. That his elaborate plan to diminish her was rooted in his own insecurity about her abilities as a parent and partner. The mountain. Air was crisp and clear, filled with the sounds of nocturnal wildlife beginning their evening activities. Sarah looked out over the vast wilderness of Yellowstone and felt something shift inside her chest. She wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. She was rediscovering her own power, her own worth, her own capacity to protect what mattered most to her. David Martinez had made a fundamental miscalculation. He'd assumed that 15 years of marriage had made her dependent and passive, that she would crumble under pressure and accept whatever settlement he offered. But the woman sitting on that balcony, planning her children's future with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to building her successful graphic design business, was nobody's victim. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to demonstrate her competence and gather evidence of David's detachment from their children's real needs. And with each passing day, Sarah Martinez was becoming more formidable than her husband had ever imagined possible. On their final morning in Yellowstone, Sarah woke before dawn to the haunting sound of elk bugling in the distance, their calls echoing across the valley in the crisp mountain air. Through the window of their suite, she could see the first hints of sunrise painting the distant peaks in shades of gold and rose, creating the kind of natural beauty that had originally drawn millions of visitors to America's first national park. In a few hours, they would begin the long drive home to Denver, and this elaborate performance would come to an end. David was still sleeping beside her, his face peaceful in the early morning light that filtered through the lodge's rustic windows. Sarah studied his features, the slight crow's feet around his eyes that had appeared during their years together, the gray threading through his dark hair that she'd always found distinguished, the mouth that had kissed her goodbye on thousands of ordinary mornings. This man had shared her bed for 15 years, had been present for every major milestone in their children's lives. But looking at him now, she felt like she was seeing a complete stranger. She dressed quietly in layers, appropriate for the cool mountain morning, and slipped out to the small balcony with her laptop and phone. It was time to make the calls that would determine her family's future, to transform from passive victim to active participant in her own life's direction. Marcus, Lisa's husband, answered on the second ring, despite the early hour. His voice was alert and professional, suggesting he'd been expecting her call. "Sarah?" Lisa told me you might call this morning. How are you holding up out there?" "I'm ready to fight," she said simply, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "What do I need to know?" Marcus had consulted with 2 colleagues who specialized in high-conflict divorce cases involving significant assets and complex custody disputes, and the news was both encouraging and sobering. The evidence Sarah had gathered during their vacation was compelling and would serve her well in court, but David's head start in legal preparation gave him certain tactical advantages that couldn't be ignored. "The fact that he moved money without your knowledge is a serious problem for him," Marcus explained, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd handled hundreds of similar cases. "Colorado courts don't look favorably on financial deception during marriage, especially when it appears calculated to disadvantage a spouse in divorce proceedings." Sarah felt a flicker of hope pierce through the anxiety that had been her constant companion for the past week. "What about the custody documentation I found? His proposal seems so extreme." "That's actually good news for you. His proposed arrangement is so heavily skewed in his favor that most family court judges would question his motives and his understanding of the children's best interests. The fact that he's seeking to limit your time with Emma and Jake to every other weekend suggests he's more interested in punishing you than in what's actually best for the kids." They talked for 30 more minutes, with Marcus outlining immediate steps Sarah needed to take once she returned to Denver. The most important priorities were documenting everything about their financial situation, securing copies of all important records before David realized she knew about his plans, and avoiding any confrontation until she had strong legal representation in place. "One more thing," Marcus said, as they prepared to end the call. "The attorney I'm recommending is Rebecca Chen. She's aggressive but ethical, doesn't back down from wealthy or well-connected opponents, and she has an excellent track record with cases involving financial deception and parental alienation. I'll have her call you tomorrow afternoon." After hanging up, Sarah sat in the mountain silence and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. For the first time in a week, she wasn't just reacting to David's deception and planning. She was taking control of her own destiny and fighting for her children's future. The family spent their last day visiting the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone, where the lower falls created a thundering spectacle that left even Jake speechless with wonder. The 308-foot waterfall plunged into the yellow-walled canyon that gave the park its name, and Sarah made sure to capture not just photos, but also videos of her children's genuine amazement and curiosity about the geological forces that had created this natural masterpiece. Emma filled the final pages of her travel journal with detailed observations and sketches, while both children completed their junior ranger requirements with the kind of pride that comes from genuine achievement. Sarah documented every moment of their educational engagement, every question they asked, every connection they made between their park experiences and their growing understanding of the natural world. "I can't believe we have to leave today," Emma said, as they packed their hiking gear for the final time, her voice carrying the disappointment that comes with the end of a truly meaningful experience. "We'll come back," David promised, putting his arm around her shoulders for what Sarah now recognized as another carefully staged photo opportunity. "This won't be our last adventure together as a family." Sarah's jaw clenched at the casual cruelty of his words. David was making promises he knew he couldn't keep, creating expectations that would make the eventual custody arrangements even more painful and confusing for their children. He was using their love and trust as weapons in his legal strategy. The drive home passed in a blur of highway miles and familiar roadside stops. The children dozed in the back seat, exhausted from 2 weeks of constant activity and adventure, their faces peaceful in sleep. David seemed unusually talkative, sharing memories from the trip and discussing future vacation possibilities, as if their marriage had a secure future ahead of it. "We should plan something special for Christmas," he said as they crossed the Colorado state line, the familiar landscape of home coming into view. "Maybe skiing in Vail if the kids are up for it, or a beach trip to somewhere warm if they want. Something completely different from all this mountain adventure." Sarah nodded and made appropriate responses, but internally she was calculating timelines with the precision of a project manager. If David filed for divorce within the next few weeks as his documents suggested, they would be deep in legal proceedings by Christmas. There would be no family ski trips or beach vacations, just custody schedules, asset division hearings, and the complex choreography of a family being systematically dismantled. They reached their Littleton home just as the sun was setting behind the Front Range, painting their familiar neighborhood in shades of orange and pink. Their house looked exactly as they'd left it 2 weeks ago, but Sarah felt like she was seeing it for the first time through the lens of legal proceedings. The mortgage David had listed as primarily his responsibility, despite her equal contributions. The furniture they'd chosen together, but that he'd apparently already decided how to divide. The children's bedrooms that might soon become part of a custody negotiation schedule. "Home sweet home," David said, stretching as they stood in their driveway, his voice carrying satisfaction that seemed genuine. Sarah wondered if he was thinking about how soon this house would no longer be their shared home. Emma and Jake ran ahead to check on their bedrooms and reconnect with the Wi-Fi they'd been missing, their excited voices echoing through the house as they rediscovered toys and books they'd forgotten about during their absence. David began unloading suitcases with the efficient movements of someone eager to return to normal routines, or perhaps eager to move forward with plans that had been temporarily delayed. "I'll start the laundry," Sarah said, gathering clothes from their luggage with the automatic efficiency of 15 years of household management. "Thanks. I should probably check work emails. I'm sure there's a crisis waiting for my attention after 2 weeks away." David disappeared into his home office, the same room where he'd spent weeks planning their divorce, while she'd been downstairs planning their vacation, researching family activities and making reservations for restaurants they'd never visit again as an intact family. Sarah carried the laundry to the basement and allowed herself 5 minutes of silent tears before composing herself and returning to the task of unpacking their family's last trip together. That night, after the children had gone to bed with heads full of vacation memories, and David had settled into his office to catch up on work, probably updating his attorney on the success of his evidence-gathering mission, Sarah made her final preparations for the battle ahead. She gathered every important document she could find: birth certificates, insurance policies, tax returns going back 7 years, bank statements, investment account records, and property deeds. She secured copies in a safety deposit box at a different bank across town, one that David didn't know about and couldn't access. She downloaded all the financial software from their shared computer and forwarded the information to secure email, accounts David had never seen. Most importantly, she wrote letters to Emma and Jake, explaining that no matter what happened in the coming weeks and months, her love for them would never change or diminish. She told them about the joy they'd brought to her life, about how proud she was of their curiosity and kindness, about how their happiness and well-being would always be her first priority. She sealed the letters and left them with Lisa, along with instructions for their delivery if something happened to her access to the children during legal proceedings. On Monday morning, exactly 3 weeks after discovering David's hidden folder, Sarah drove to downtown Denver through familiar streets that looked different now, colored by her new understanding of her situation. She met Rebecca Chen in a glass-walled conference room that overlooked the city's financial district, where men in expensive suits made decisions that affected ordinary families like hers. Rebecca was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of quiet competence that reminded Sarah of her own professional demeanor when handling complex graphic design projects. She reviewed Sarah's evidence with impressive speed and thoroughness, asking pointed questions and taking detailed notes that suggested she understood both the legal complexities and the emotional stakes involved. "Your husband made several significant, tactical errors," Rebecca concluded after 2 hours of careful analysis. "The most important is that he underestimated you completely. His legal strategy assumes you're passive, uninformed, and emotionally unstable, which clearly isn't the case. Based on the evidence you've gathered and the way you've handled this situation." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to jump into an uncertain future. "Now we file first, and we file aggressively. We'll seek temporary custody and support orders that protect your interests, while the case proceeds through the courts. will also request a full financial disclosure and ask the court to freeze any assets he might try to hide or transfer. Most importantly, will control the narrative from the beginning, instead of letting him set the terms. Sarah felt the familiar flutter of anxiety, mixed with determination, that had carried her through the most challenging moments of building her graphic design business from nothing. How long will this process take? Colorado requires a 91-day waiting period for divorce cases involving children, but the real timeline depends on how cooperative your husband chooses to be. Based on his preparation level and the calculation behind his strategy, I'd expect him to fight every point aggressively. Then we'd better be ready to fight back just as hard. Rebecca smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd shown during their meeting. Mrs. Martinez, I think you're going to surprise a lot of people with how ready you are to protect your children and secure your future. That evening, Sarah cooked David's favorite dinner, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, the comfort food. He'd grown up eating at his mother's table and helped the children with homework as if nothing fundamental had changed in their lives. David seemed relaxed and happy, probably believing his timeline was proceeding according to plan, and that his unsuspecting wife was still playing her assigned role in his elaborate deception. He had no way of knowing that legal papers were being prepared across town, or that his wife had spent the day building a comprehensive strategy that would protect everything he was planning to take away from her and their children. After dinner, as they cleaned up together with the easy teamwork that had developed over 15 years of marriage, David squeezed her hand and smiled with what seemed like genuine affection. "Thanks for an amazing vacation," he said, his voice warm with apparent gratitude. "The kids will remember this trip for the rest of their lives. You did such a good job planning everything." "Yes," Sarah agreed, meeting his eyes with steady calm that concealed the steel beneath. "They definitely will remember everything about this trip." But as she dried the dishes and listened to Emma practicing piano in the living room, while Jake built elaborate structures with his Legos in the family room, Sarah knew that the memories her children would carry forward wouldn't just be of geysers and waterfalls and family adventures in America's most famous national park. They would also remember, eventually, how their mother had found the strength to protect them when their world started to fall apart, how she'd fought for their future when everything they'd known as normal began to crumble. Tomorrow, Rebecca Chen would file the papers that would officially begin the end of Sarah's marriage to David Martinez. But tonight, as she tucked her children into beds in a house that still felt like home, Sarah Martinez knew she was ready for whatever legal battles and emotional challenges lay ahead. David had spent weeks planning his perfect divorce, carefully, orchestrating every detail to ensure his victory and her defeat. He'd calculated financial advantages, gathered evidence to support his custody claims, and created a timeline designed to catch her completely unprepared and defenseless. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation that would prove to be his downfall. He'd assumed that the woman who'd loved him unconditionally for 15 years, who'd built a successful business while raising 2 children and managing their household, would remain passive and helpless when threatened with the loss of everything she'd worked to build and protect. He was about to discover that Sarah Martinez was much stronger, smarter, and more strategic than he'd ever imagined, and that underestimating her would be the biggest mistake of his carefully planned legal strategy. The reckoning was coming, and Sarah would be ready to fight for her children, her future, and her own sense of justice with every skill and resource at her disposal. 3 months later, as autumn painted the Colorado landscape in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Sarah sat in her new apartment helping Emma with a comprehensive school project about national parks and conservation while Jake practiced piano in the corner, his fingers moving confidently across the keys as he worked through a challenging piece by Bach. She reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that terrible morning, when she'd discovered David's hidden folder labeled Vacation. The divorce had been finalized after a grueling legal battle that lasted 4 months, but the settlement had ultimately protected both her financial security and her precious relationship with her children. The court had seen through David's manipulative strategy, recognizing Sarah's competence as a parent and awarding her joint custody with a schedule that respected both parents' relationships with Emma and Jake. David had primary physical custody during the school year to minimize disruption to the children's academic routines, but Sarah had them every weekend from Friday evening through Monday morning, half of all school holidays, including extended winter and spring breaks, and the entire month of July plus 2 weeks in December. More importantly, they shared legal custody equally, meaning all major decisions about the children's education, health care, and extracurricular activities required mutual agreement. The financial settlement had been fair, with Sarah retaining half of their marital assets and receiving spousal support that would allow her to maintain stability while rebuilding her independent life. More importantly, Emma and Jake had adjusted to their new reality, with the resilience that children often show when adults handle difficult situations with honesty and love. They understood that their parents' marriage had ended, but they never doubted that both parents loved them completely. Sarah had used her graphic design skills to create a detailed scrapbook of their Yellowstone vacation, filled with photos, journal entries, and educational information about everything they'd seen and learned. It sat on their coffee table as a reminder that even the most difficult experiences could contain moments of genuine joy and discovery. She'd also started a new chapter in her professional life, expanding her graphic design business to specialize in materials for educational and conservation organizations. Her first major client was the National Park Service, creating interpretive materials that would help families like hers connect with America's natural heritage. As she watched her children work on their homework in the warm lamplight of their new home, Sarah realized that David's betrayal, while devastating, had also revealed her own strength and capabilities in ways she'd never fully appreciated. She was a better parent, a more successful professional, and a stronger person than she'd ever imagined possible. The folder labeled Vacation had contained David's plan to destroy their family, but it had also inadvertently revealed Sarah's power to protect and rebuild what mattered most to her. In trying to diminish her, David had actually helped her discover just how formidable Sarah Martinez could be when fighting for the people and principles she loved most.